lovelies, it's Miss Lady Lace here, and today I have for you the next fabulous edition of my Vintage Tea With Me series, where we'll be sipping tea and talking about a fabulous discussion point. So today I'm going to be talking about a topic I get asked about very frequently. I've received so many comments on this, as well as many messages and emails, and it's finally the day where I'm going to be talking about how to dress vintage on a budget. For this topic, I have 5 fabulous tips that I'll be sharing to help you shop vintage on a budget. I have been experimenting with vintage styling for over 10 years now, and I definitely have gone through so many different styles personally. So I'll be sharing some of the things that I have learned definitely through doing it the wrong way, and also some things that will hopefully help you be guided through your vintage shopping experiences. What I'll be sharing is applicable for both reproduction vintage lovers as well as our true vintage lovers. Obviously, I will discuss true vintage a little bit more in detail, and I'll hopefully have lots more videos coming out on this topic very soon. Tip number 1 for vintage shopping on a budget is to understand what inspires you most in vintage shopping. Are you drawn most to the 1940s, the 1950s, rockabilly fashion, gothabilly fashion, or anything in between? Understanding what fashion you adore most will make it easier to find the right items for you. Now, for a lot of us, especially myself talking from experience, I have learned a lot about styling through trial and error. I've bought a lot of pieces that I don't wear anymore and I've passed on to friends or donated to charity stores, but you can definitely skip this step a little bit if you understand what inspires you most in vintage shopping. Do you want to wear a beautiful 1940s suit? Do you want to wear a 1950s swing skirt? Or do you want to have a modern interpretation of that vintage fashion? We can find this inspiration in so many different ways. We can watch old 1940s and 50s musicals. We can follow some of our favorite Instagram accounts and sort of go to what fashion they adore. And you can also use this fabulous website called Pinterest. I know lots of you lovely ladies already use this, but essentially it's kind of like a website where there's a whole bunch of pictures and you can pin them to an inspiration board and you can plan out your perfect wardrobe. I use Pinterest for lots of my projects, whether I'm creating a burlesque act, I'm putting together a look or photo shoot. I just love that there's so many different images that I can research on Pinterest and put together and really see my vision through and create from there. Tip number 2 is, once you sort of have an idea of the wardrobe you want to create, start making a wish list and staple items that you require for your wardrobe. A few fabulous things to make your wardrobe easy to accessorize with would be a A-line skirt, pencil skirt, wiggle skirt, swing skirt, a whole bunch of blouses in different styles and colors, vintage dresses with beautiful necklines is something I really adore, and of course all the beautiful accessories to go with this. If you know what you're looking for, it'll make your shopping experience so much easier. If you plan your wardrobe to have a lot of blouses and skirts and different accessories to tie these all together, you can really mix and match and get the most out of the few items you have, especially as you begin to create your wardrobe. Tip number 3 is understanding that it will take a little bit of time to cultivate your own vintage wardrobe. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have been collecting vintage clothing for over 10 years. When I first started though, I think I only had maybe 1 or 2 items, and these were, one was a 1940s ball gown and I only wore that on special occasions, and there are a few other items, but they were definitely something I wouldn't be brave enough to wear more on a daily basis. Quite often, people who are new to vintage spend a lot of money on building this big wardrobe, particularly out of reproduction items or even vintage items. They'll spend so much money and find that they don't quite like the style on themselves, or down the road they'll further develop their vintage style, and this could be in a matter of months. The clothes you've spent a lot of money on no longer represent who you are. Many of us will have budget limitations to what we can spend, it's good to think about what your budget is, set that price, and definitely stick to that. We want to look fabulous, but also live the life we want to. Tip number 5 is don't throw out all the clothes you already have. There are so many items that you have in your wardrobe that you'll more than likely be able to utilize for your new wardrobe. Fashion is very cyclical, and many items that you own may fit in perfectly with your vintage wardrobe. You may own a pencil skirt or a beautiful blouse that will just tie in beautifully to your vintage aesthetic. Now let's say you have no money for a vintage wardrobe just yet. You have very limited income to spend on this, so a great way of looking vintage without redoing your wardrobe is simply to wear vintage hair and makeup with your current modern clothing. As silly as it sounds, you will look so much more vintage by just mastering the art of vintage styling with your hair and makeup. If I wore my current hair and makeup with a modern outfit, I would still have that very vintage look to me. So this is definitely the easiest way we can begin to look vintage without spending a lot of money. Tip number 5 will be looking at the best places to shop to build your vintage wardrobe on a budget. One of my favorite places to shop is the op shop, which in other countries are known as a thrift store. These are so darn fabulous because you could honestly go to an op shop today, especially a more affordable op shop. Some do up the price of vintage styled items, but many you could pretty much redo your whole wardrobe for $100, maybe $200, which is super affordable. Now, op shops will have a collection of different items, but again, you want to take that wish list and staple item list that you created before, and you can use this to find different items such as your blouses and skirts to create your desired looks. And if you're real lucky, you may even find a few true vintage pieces. I have been lucky over the years and bought a few beautiful true vintage items, as well as so many modern reproduction items, which are just so fabulous. Being a vintage clothing lover, probably my favorite place to shop is the vintage clothing stores. These are stores that specialize in selling true vintage clothing, but the hard thing is many of them do charge what these items are worth in their opinion. I'm definitely someone who will hunt around the store and I'll have a look around and find items I like. And a great thing with these is many of them are secondhand and have flaws. You can often make an offer if there's something wrong with that item that you know you can fix. It's also worth waiting for if they have a sale coming up or anything fabulous like that. You can also shop at your regular chain stores like Target, Kmart, Cotton On, and all those other big clothing companies. Many of these will also include different beautiful skirts, play suits, blouses, and other items you can utilize, especially if they're more affordable. A question that I receive very frequently is, what do I think of vintage reproduction stores? Are they something that I shop from? Do I wear much vintage reproduction? These are stores that sell vintage style clothing which has been made in modern times. A few fabulous examples would be Lindy Bop and Collective Clothing. I do absolutely adore true vintage clothing, but I do wear a lot of modern reproduction as well because it's more practical, it's more affordable in a lot of senses, and you're less likely to damage the garment while you're wearing it because a lot of true vintage clothing can be 80 plus years old, so it's very easy to tear or do damage to that garment. My big tip for shopping at these stores though is to wait until they have a sale on. This way you get the same beautiful quality item, but you get it at a much cheaper price. It is a little bit harder though because you do have to play the waiting game a little bit more. Another fabulous place where you can source both reproduction and true vintage is the website Etsy. Essentially it's all handmade and vintage goods that you can find on there. And for using this website, especially on a budget, what you can do is type in what you're looking for, and on the left hand side you can set the budget that you like. So you can go from $0 to $20 and look at what items fit within that budget. And this is a really fabulous way of finding your true vintage clothing at a much cheaper price. These have been my fabulous tips for vintage shopping on a budget. If you're a vintage lover and have any additional tips to help our vintage community, do comment below so you can share your own vintage shopping experience with everyone here. And if you'd like to see more fabulous videos on vintage shopping, true vintage clothing, and everything else in between, also give me a comment below so I know what you'd like to see. I love you all so much and can't thank you enough for supporting my channel. It's been wonderful getting to know you here and on Instagram. I do post super regularly to there, so do be sure to follow me. I'll include a little link here as well as at the end of the video. As always, if you'd like to stay up to date with all my vintage fun, be sure to hit that subscribe button below and I will be seeing you all real soon.